what I'm going to do is I think I will get started. We'll get started with book club. What we do is we always record book club so that people that have registered and aren't able to meet for the live session can join us at a time that suits them. And we've had quite a few sign-ups this time around, which is wonderful, because I think this is a subject that really resonates with lots of people, whether you are a working mother, whether you are an employer who has mothers on your team. I think it's a really important message to actually send and get out there. So the way that we run book club, for those of you that haven't joined us before, my name is Lesley Mourant and I am the principal coach here at Inspirational Group. If you haven't come across Inspirational Group before, we specialise in leadership development, coaching and communications. And really, we are a passionate bunch of individuals who are dedicated and really inspired about creating leadership for a better tomorrow. So, book club itself. The way that we run book club is that I will have a discussion with our chosen author, and this month we have Belinda Jane Batt with us, which is wonderful. We're going to have a discussion for about half an hour. And then what we will do is we will move into a open Q&A. So I know that lots of you have signed up and you'll be watching this on record. Sophia, Becky, this will be your time to shine. And if there are no questions that you want to ask, I have so many questions, Belinda, to ask you. We will just keep the conversation going. So I hope everybody is comfy and got what they need to listen in, and we'll just get started. So I mentioned that we have Belinda here today. So welcome, Belinda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us. Now, for those of you that haven't come across Belinda before, Belinda is a mother, positive psychology coach founder, and founder of the Flourishing Mother, and now is author of her wonderful new book, Challenge Your Guilt. So, Belinda, I would absolutely love for you to just give yourself an introduction to everybody who is going to be listening in today, and really just tell us the story about how your book has come to life.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so as you said, I am a mother. My kids are 4 and 7 now. So I guess this journey began when I had my first child, obviously, because I hadn't experienced motherhood before that. So 7 years ago, I got pregnant. A bit more than 7 years ago, I got pregnant. My son's just turned 7. So and I had been in a very unfulfilling PR career for many, many years. I don't think even, pushing 8 years ago, I really knew what I wanted to do with my life. And I had returned to psychology recently. Just before I got pregnant with my son, I decided to go back and do a master's degree in positive psychology and coaching psychology. And honestly, I don't think I really knew where that was going to go. I don't actually really think I knew that the coaching was the bit that I was interested in. I think it was the psychology that interested me the most, because my undergraduate degree was a psychology degree. And the timing was everything, I think, because what happened was I had my son, I paused my degree, I then had a year of parenting my son, and then I decided to go back to finish my degree. So by the time I actually handed in my dissertation, it was 3 weeks before I had my daughter. So I had this little bit of experience of parenting, and so I had decided that I would do my research project, my dissertation, on the lived experience of maternal guilt in the first 12 months of being a mother, because it was very pertinent to me at that time, the first year of motherhood. So I did this research project. It was really interesting. It resonated a lot with my own experience, and I had experienced a lot of guilt. So that was kind of why I decided to choose that topic in the first place. And then I finished the degree, had my daughter, got, started drowning again in new motherhood all over again. And just over time, well, I launched my coaching business because I finished my degree. I could coach by this point. I became an accredited coach, all of that journey. And I think what's happened since then is that I've just stayed very curious about the experience of guilt. I knew that there was a huge gap in my knowledge because I'd only interviewed and experienced a short bit of, the mothering journey. And so as time went on, I decided purely out of passion project, genuinely, I didn't really know where it was going to go, but I started interviewing mums one by one, just recording them for half an hour on Zoom, wrote a very vague disclaimer form with no real kind of like, I don't know where this is going to go. It might be a book, it might be a blog, it might be this. And it was all anonymous. So, they really felt they could share their experience. And alongside that, I undertook some further study in the sociology of motherhood studies with a fantastic lady who is in Australia called Dr. Sophie Brock. And that was the missing piece of the puzzle for me. So I'd kind of spoken to people about their lived experience of guilt. I'd lived guilt, myself. I'd learned about coaching and positive psychology. I kind of had all these fantastic tools and tips that I could share with mums. And then I did this extra study certification, and I suddenly learned all of this amazing, mind-blowing stuff about where guilt comes from, how we're socialized into our roles as mothers and fathers, and what that means for women and men. And it was just huge, and it was such an aha moment, I guess, of that's where I need to go with my work with mums. That's where I need to go, because it's really easy for me to sit and say, here are some tips and tools, or let's coach you through what you're going through. But what I think is really critical is that we understand that this is bigger than us. I actually did a session earlier today with a fellow coach, and we were talking about I loved her phrase, this is systemic, not personal. And I think that that really, really sums up what I'm trying to do in my work, which is fundamentally, first and foremost, for us to help mothers to realize that this is not just about them and their perceived failings. It's about mothering in a system which is not set up to support mothers. And so that is kind of all that's in the book, basically.
Yeah. Amazing. And actually, just as you were speaking then, that's the piece that really resonates with me, and why I was like, this has to get out here, in terms of it is systemic. It's not just about mothers. This isn't a mother issue. This is actually a cultural, societal issue. Just to create that, I guess, that wholeness and everybody being on the same page, I wondered whether you could really define guilt in what that is and how it shows up for mothers.
Yeah, so I think the way that I define guilt, I actually have two kind of definitions, I guess. So the first thing I would encourage mums to think about when they experience what they would feel is guilt is to think about whether that guilt is helpful guilt or unhelpful guilt. So, I mean, essentially guilt is that feeling that we're not doing well enough, that we've done, we're doing something badly, we're not, living up to the expectations of a good mother, whether that's our expectations or society's expectations, whatever that might be. So we feel guilt when we perceive ourselves as not doing as well as we feel we would like to do or we should do. And then that's why I go into talking about helpful guilt and unhelpful guilt, because I think that it's a really important next step of the process, is to understand if the voice that we're hearing that's telling us we're not good enough is our own voice, and if it's coming from a place of trying to align us better with our own values, then I call that helpful guilt. So if it's kind of screen time and you get that niggling feeling that maybe that something's not right, and if you're anything like me, which I think most of us probably are, then that might be that niggling feeling that something's not right is probably because we have values that are very much centered around connection with our kids and family time and health. It's not very healthy to be watching screens for 3 hours at a time, So for me, that is a good example of helpful guilt, because it's when those kind of niggles, and just so that no one feels guilty, by the way, I have a very long threshold of television time before I start to feel those niggles. It's not like 10 minutes and I feel it. But if it's been, an hour and a half or something, and they're not watching a film, they're just watching back-to-back episodes of God knows what, because I'm not really focused on what they're doing, that's when I start to feel maybe like I need to check in with them. So for me, that's values led, and that's it's encouraging me to modify my behavior in line with my values, and I would put that in the helpful category. The unhelpful guilt is the problem as far as I'm concerned, and I think I probably need to run some kind of scientific study where I can actually produce a stat on this, because I always say that I would say in my lived experience, probably about 80% of the guilt I feel is societally driven and unhelpful. But God knows what the actual statistic would be if we did it. But that kind of guilt is the kind of guilt that just has you feeling all the time that you're never good enough. So it's not kind of helpful in the sense that it's taking you anywhere. The only place it's taking you is ruminating on your perceived failings and all the things that you're doing wrong. And the most kind of the worst place that can take you is down the guilt spiral into shame, which is a much more toxic emotion than guilt. And I think that is a very dangerous kind of pattern that we see, or I see a lot with the clients that I work with, is that we've gone down that spiral. It's very hard to get back up again when you're sitting in shame. So that, for me, that would be the distinction. So the first thing I say with the mums that I work with is, what is the guilt? Is it helpful and it's aligning with your values, or is it unhelpful and it's coming from outside of you? And that's the guilt we need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, again, just sort of talking from my own experience, having read that so early on in your book, that actually really changed the way that I was looking at my own guilt, because I feel like I often just feel guilty about everything. It's never quite good enough. And actually having that choice of sort of just pausing and saying, okay, well, actually, what guilt is it? And then either accepting it because actually that's what we need in the moment and I need to get on with things, or being able to actually course correct was really, really powerful for me. Obviously, you're working with mothers and, mothers who are working as well as alongside mothering. And I wondered, just for the audience who are working in businesses or perhaps part of leadership, I wondered what your opinion was around sort of the negative impact around businesses not addressing this guilt in mothers and parents.
Well, we know that over 80% of women are leaving the workforce altogether within 3 years of having children. And I'm not saying that is just because of the fact that they're feeling guilty, but I think that is a key factor in what's happening. Because when we're looking at, again, I had this session earlier today, which is really pertinent. It's all very top of mind at the moment. When we're looking at, the push and the pull, the fact that actually being a mother is a whole nother job on top of the job. And the problem is that society and most employers don't actually value caregiving. What they value is productivity. We live in this very kind of capitalist society where actually everything is driven by productivity and what we can achieve. And so inevitably, when you pause your career to have a child, we can push for equality all we like, but at the end of the day, mostly it's the women that are actually physically having the baby. So there's always going to be some time where the woman is with the baby and not working, and then inevitably there is going to be that, that push pull, because we've got 2 jobs now and we've got 2 masters, as it were. And so many of the moms that I work with are just stuck between the two, and you feel, when you're at home, you feel that you're thinking about work, and when you're at work, you feel that you're thinking about home. And so there is very rarely that moment to breathe and to center yourself and to think that actually you're actually doing all right, because most of the time you feel like you're not doing all right. You feel like you're, and actually, particularly, I think in the workplace, we feel so apologetic about it, because we know that our employers really want and need us to do our job, and that's first and foremost what they care about. But there is increasing, research and understanding of the fact that line managers, having empathetic line managers, this is something that Jess Heegren talks about a lot in her work with careers after babies. Having empathetic line managers can make a massive difference to employee well-being, and particularly mothers' well-being. So when we're looking at what employers need to do, yes, of course you're focusing on your profitability and all of that, but actually if you're not addressing the feelings of not enoughness, not good enoughness that mothers are feeling in droves when they're coming back to work, then you're failing the mothers and you're failing the company, because they'll be leaving within 3 years, probably, if not sooner.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as a sort of add-on to that, I'm wondering if you could redesign one workplace policy or norm that could better support mothers, where would you start?
Oh God, I think obviously more flexibility. The back to work 9 to 5 in the office is ludicrous and completely outdated, and I just don't know why why it's still being pushed in the way that it is. I think that's really the obvious one, but I actually really also think that there is a fundamental problem with the communication that is happening with women and men and women, everyone. Let's not exclude men, actually. Let's talk about parents. When people decide to have children, there needs to be a conversation with the employer at that point. And when you go on maternity leave, you need to be having that conversation about what your career is going to look like afterwards. You may not know. Of course, things change. We feel very different when we've had children. But there needs to be at least that feeling of continuity and care, and that your employer hasn't already given up on you as soon as you've told them that you're pregnant, which is something that I see so often and have experienced myself. That sinking feeling when you tell them you're pregnant and you can just see their eyes glaze over and you just know that's it. You're not going to be promoted. You're not going to get that, that next opportunity. So I think if the communication was better, I think if there were more check-ins, during the maternity period, because I don't know about you, but mine was just a dry spell, nothing. And you might be, we might be happy in our cocoon and we're looking forward to having kids, but actually if I believe that if there were more touch points, it would be less jarring for us to come back, and it would be less jarring for our managers and our team members and everyone, to come back. So I think there needs to be more touch points sooner. And I think on a broader scale, when we're talking about gender equality and actually bringing men in more and alleviating the pressure on modern mums so that our careers don't fall by the wayside as soon as we have children, which is what's happening a lot at the moment. I think we all need to be having those conversations, in our homes as well as our workplaces, about what it's going to look like, because too often I think it's assumed that the woman is just going to take it all on. And that's what happens, and then it ends up being a bit of a car crash the other side for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I from my own experience, I mean, firstly, my maternity leave, I didn't hear from my employer, and I actually left before I even went back because it just went really quiet, and I just thought, do you know what, I can't do the job that I was doing now that my baby is here. But as an aside from that, again, sort of my own maternal experience is that for me, having some kind of employment was actually really good for my mental health. I mean, as much as I loved being with my daughter, and, I enjoy all the things that babies bring and children bring, actually having work to do, having some employment, I feel actually really brought back some of my confidence and being able to do more than thinking about the next meal that's not going to be eaten or the next load of washing that needs to be put in and dried. And who I am now is very different to who I was beforehand, and I think it's an upgrade on who I was, actually. And again, just because you are working in this sphere with so many women and you've done all of this research and have this understanding, just can you clarify those skills that actually businesses are missing out on by not accommodating more working parents?
It's such a I love that you've said that, because I think it's really important to recognize that so many women not just need to work but want to work. You know, we don't necessarily have the ambition that we're just going to all have children and that's all we're ever going to do ever again. And I think when you talk about skills, I often encourage my clients to think about what their transferable skills are, because we're all so scared of that gap on our CV, and we don't know what to put in it, because we feel, you know, because the role of it's tragic how devalued the role of caregiver is in society, because we feel so devalued by the time off that from work. But actually, when we look at the skills that we can bring back into the workplace, there are so many things that we learn, you know, the juggle of everything, the resilience that you need, you know, my God, like we're all so sleep deprived and yet we're able to juggle 5,000 things at the same time. You know, I think I say in the book that before I had a child, I could achieve, you know, 5 things in a morning, but since now I can do a million things at the same time. It's like, you know, it's like you get an upgrade in your brain as soon as you have a child, like a microchip or something, you know. But it's all seen as a weakness because we're tired, because we're this, because we're that, because we have to, you know, we can't do work trips, because we have to leave early, because we have, you know, it's everything is framed as a weakness, when actually I think employers need to understand that that mothers have so much, you know, to bring to the table. It's if only they would understand that we need a bit of flexibility, because we can still do what we did, but we can't do what we did it within the same framework that we were doing it in, you know. And it's so simple, but and you know, the skills that we have, they need to be valued much more highly. I don't know, I won't go on a rant about gender differences, but I just think when we become mothers, it's a game-changing experience, and I think it's hugely valuable to the workplace, but it needs to be seen that way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that you highlighted then in terms of that, you know, we're able to do the work, just not in the framework that is traditionally provided. And actually, I have never, ever, and I've been on the other side, by the way. So I've been in HR and I've been that person where I've seen that gap and I've, you know, gap, not going to consider them. And now that I'm a mother, obviously all of my views have changed, and I apologize to anybody who I dismissed purely on that basis. But there is like this fear from organizations around, you know, oh, well, actually, you know, if they're flexible, they're not going to be doing the work. And I can genuinely say, like, through all of my peers, all of the people that I've come across who are working alongside mothering, there is not one that I have met that is doing the bare minimum in terms of what they are providing with work, especially when they are offered flexibility. And in fact, sometimes I feel like it's to our detriment, because it's like you often end up doing more to prove that you can be flexible and that you can continue this train that you either need or you choose to be part of.
I was going to say, actually, that's something that really gets my goat, is this is fake flexibility, you know, is when you're offered the flexibility, but actually the flexibility they still expect the same amount of you. So you agree to a 4-day-a-week contract, but actually you end up missing every Friday, which is meant to be your time with your child, because you actually have to catch up on the work that you haven't managed to do, or you're working weekends, or you're working evenings, and like you say, you're trying to prove your worth. I think that is a real danger, and I think that some employers are taking advantage of women, you know, in exactly that way. So I think it's really important. I recorded a podcast actually yesterday with Amy Grilly, who is has launched the 5-hour club. So you know, they've got a job board with roles that are, you know, can be done in 5 hours a day. And I was asking her exactly that question: how do we stop employers from taking advantage of mothers by posting jobs that are part-time but actually are full-time? And she was, you know, we were having that conversation, because it's important to be understanding how to not take advantage of mothers, whilst, you know, how to support them and not actually go too far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned earlier about that sort of statistic about 80% of mothers leaving the workforce in the space of 3 years, which just sounds insane. Like, how is this happening and going under the radar pretty much? And I wonder from your experience what you feel the landscape currently is for organisations, i.e., are you seeing organisations step up to the plate and starting to really sort of harness this? Or is this something that's still being dragged, kicking and screaming into, I guess, the world that we need for today?
I am not seeing hugely positive things, if I'm honest. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll caveat that by saying my finger is not on the pulse of every organization. Most but not all of my clients are one-to-one clients, as opposed to corporate clients. The
Yeah.
corporate clients I have are very lovely, sympathetic, great companies, and what they're doing is wonderful, and they're hugely supportive of their employees. I know from my networks that there is a long way to go in terms of of getting enough organizations on board. I know from even that conversation with Amy that they're struggling to populate that job board with enough jobs for all of the people that need them. So there is fundamentally a huge, I suppose that's the answer, right? There is fundamentally a huge gap between the number of flexible jobs available and the number of women that need those flexible jobs. So I guess that tells us everything we need to know, right? We're not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, sort of you sharing that, it sounds like this is a really great opportunity for businesses to jump on, because there will be people queuing out the door to really actually take advantage of that, or to bring their skills to the table, knowing that they've got that flexibility. I want to bring it back to mothers themselves, because there's a couple of sections in your book which are lovely, and I really liked your reimagining guilt. And I wondered, sort of from that chapter, what would you want our listeners to sort of take away as a sort of first step in terms of really helping to reimagine their guilt?
I think, coming back to what I said earlier, I can't remember which chapter that was now, so I'm just going to try and speak from the heart rather than from the chapter.
Yeah.
I think we need to understand, like I said at the beginning, where the guilt is coming from. I think there is a beautiful analogy which my teacher, Dr. Sophie Brock, so the further studies I was talking about earlier in the sociology of motherhood studies, she talks about the fish tank of motherhood.
Yes.
Which I think is such a powerful image. So she talks about we're all swimming around, all the mothers, we're swimming around in the tank, and all around the walls of the tank are written the rules of perfect motherhood. And as we're swimming and we're looking at the rules on the tank, we're breathing in the rules that everyone is telling us, about what it means to be a mother and all this. So, and then we're looking at all the other mothers in the tank and we're thinking, am I doing what they're doing? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? But so few of us have the awareness that we're in the tank in the first place.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about reimagining guilt, let's think about having the awareness that the guilt is coming from outside of ourselves, having the awareness that the system is broken and that it's not us that's broken, it's the system that's broken. And then when you have that awareness, and when you've gone to that next step up, and you're able to sort of detach yourself slightly from your guilt, and like I said, interrogate it, challenge it, say, is it helpful, is it unhelpful? I think it becomes easier to break it down. Actually, I think it becomes easier to have self-compassion, because a lot of the time when we're beating ourselves up about things in motherhood, and work, and everything, we are kind of feeling like it's all our fault and we can't see the wood for the trees, and it's just us, and we're just not managing, when actually we're never going to be able to do the things that we're trying to do, because the whole system we're trying to do it in everything is stopping us from being able to flourish. So when you have that awareness and you're able to differentiate, and you can pause, and you learn those techniques to kind of pause, stop, challenge, all of those things, remind yourself that it's not you, it's the system, it's a lot easier to have self-compassion. But when you're in it and you don't have that awareness, I think that's a hard place to be, because it's, you know, because people can say to you, oh, you just need to be, you know, go more gently on yourself, or, you know, give yourself a break. And you're like, but everyone else is doing better, and you know, why is it me that's failing, and you know. So you need that bigger picture piece, I think. And until you have that, I think it's very hard to reimagine, you know, your life without the guilt. But then when you have it, you can go, well, I don't want to listen to that particular voice of guilt, because that's coming from outside of myself. And I think social media as well is such a toxic, you know, we talk about modern mothers. I talk about modern mothers very specifically, because I think that we are really in the eye of this storm of, you know, all this years of societal change, and yet nothing's actually changed. And so we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and it doesn't work, and we're banging our heads against the wall and saying, well, I can't get my kids to school and still be at work at that time, and I don't understand why this is all feels so hard. And then we pick up our phones and we're in a low moment, and we start doom scrolling through our phones, and it's like, well, she's amazing and they're doing really well, and that family, you know, and like everything is designed and pressuring us to interrogate our own kind of failures, basically, and to think that we are lacking, when actually we're not, you know. And when you know that, when you really understand that, then I think you can start to reimagine a lot more easily.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned in the book, actually, which took me by surprise, around this whole, I think it was like a race to the bottom in terms of, you know, what we share about motherhood. And so I always had this impression that most people will try to mask their motherhood journey in terms of, oh, it's okay, it's all pretty. And obviously, leaning into social media, it's so aesthetically beautiful. You know, and I just remember early motherhood of, you know, if I managed to brush my hair, you know, during the week, that was a bonus for me. But when I started to think about it from the book, with the passage that you shared, I actually realized that, yes, I have more confidence telling people the bads. Like, I feel more guilt around telling people what went really well for me. You know, what goes really well. So, you know, for example, feeding or just birthing in itself, I find it like you feel guilty because you're not sharing that. Well, not sorry, you don't want to be smug about the journey that you've gone through. And I found it really just quite interesting. And I wonder, actually, sort of whilst we're talking about this, how do we change that narrative so that we can really bring every facet of motherhood to the forefront, and again, sort of really dismantle this kind of unrealistic and totally totally not real perfect image of motherhood.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, and I think there is guilt. There's guilt when it goes badly. There's guilt when it goes well, too well, whatever too well is. And I don't know. I'm just reflecting on that. I think breastfeeding is a really good example of that. I've spoken to quite a lot of mums who, you know, like you've either had a really good experience or a really bad experience. There's not many people that just sort of cruised along in the middle. Most of us have either been great or terrible. And I think there's a lot of guilt associated with that. But I think we have to kind of, I think connecting with each other as mothers is really important. And not just, like you say, not just in a way of, it's not necessarily a bad thing to share the bad bits, because normally we do that because we're trying to build solidarity and make each other feel better, and, you know, all the rest of it. But I do also think that there is a danger in that, because, like you said, we need to be championing the good bits too. We need to be seeing this as a complete experience. This is not, you know, yes, motherhood can be really hard, but it can also be really great. And, you know, there are good moments as well as bad moments. And actually, if we are more honest about the whole thing, And if we lean into each other more, and if societally there was this lovely, beautiful shift that happened where caregiving was valued more, then I don't think we would feel, it wouldn't be like our dirty little secret to admit that things were going really well in quite the same way. But I think there's a stigma, isn't there? And I think it's almost like it's becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we are just sharing the bad bits because we're stuck in this rut and we all feel so crap all the time. And so we're just telling each other how crap we feel, and we're talking in our echo chambers. But the danger of the echo, there is a big danger of the echo chamber, and that's what I'm really trying to always be talking about, the men as well, because actually I don't think I think the system is failing everyone. I don't think the system is just failing women. I think there are many men who, if we're talking about social conditioning and at its very base, simplest terms, men have been socially conditioned into the provider role, and women are socially conditioned into the caregiver role. And it has become so extreme that we've got so many women that are like, hang on, I don't want to just be a caregiver, and why am I giving everyone care all the time, and I haven't got space to do anything else, so I can't have a career, and I can't do this, and I can't do anything that I want. I can't look after myself because all of my energy is looking after everyone else. And then you've got the men who are going, well, I don't even see my children. Why am I working so hard? Why am I the main breadwinner when my wife, had a really good job before she got pregnant, and now she's been pushed out after 3 years? So, I guess that's an extension of the answer to your question. But I think if there was less stigma, and if we could be actually having these conversations outside of our echo chambers, and we're not just doing the race to the bottom because we're trying to make each other feel better, if we're actually sharing every part of parenthood with everyone, and having conversations that are meaningful with employers, and looking at the working hours, and looking at the school days, and working out understanding that none of this fits and none of this is helping parents generally, then I think all of that would change. I think everything would change.
I absolutely love that. And just for those of you that are listening in and perhaps responsible for organizational change or to creating policies, etc., Belinda has a great chapter 12 in her book, which talks about the societal changes that we can make to really help I guess dissipate maternal guilt, and actually really raise the bar for the society that we want to have amongst us, that works for mothers and parents and just for everyone as a whole. I'm really conscious of time, Belinda, so I want to open up the floor to our live participants to see if they have any burning questions that they would like to ask you.
Putting them on the spot.
Yeah, I am. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. And I'm just curious whether your research was done in the UK or globally.
Good question. So my research with the parents that I spoke to was done in the UK. I did interview some mothers who originated from outside of the UK but now live in the UK. So there were some kind of, cross-cultural learnings. But I did include in the book some studies that I had seen that were outside of the UK. And I think, there's some quite interesting studies from, I would say, the more progressive kind of Nordic countries, where you're seeing that they have policies which are different in terms of workplace and gender equality, and it's still far from perfect, but I definitely saw some interesting research studies in those countries that some of which I've mentioned in the book. But I think that's a good question, and certainly it's important to note that the experience of guilt in motherhood will be different, across different cultures and different countries. But I think the perspective that I put across in the book is predominantly a Western societal, picture. And I think it's quite clear that a lot of us in the UK, I've got a lot of contacts and friends in the US, you know, we all seem to be feeling very similar feelings when it comes to guilt. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to widen that net and to understand. And culturally, you know, if you looked at completely different, you know, far away countries where the whole family setup is different, where they still have the village, or at least, you know, the grandparents are still living in the home. You know, it's not, that's a key part of the kind of Western you know, capitalist patriarchal society that we are living in, is that we have just got so far from what one might consider to be a natural state of, you know, living, working, parenting. We are not meant to be living in these tiny family units in individual houses, you know, not checking in with our neighbours. The grandparents are 5 hours away or more. We're not meant to be living like this. So I think that's another thing to think about, it, isn't it? Is when we look at cross-culturally at those cultures where, and I would love to do that, you know, to do a study in cultures where the family is much closer and the extended family is much closer, because I think you'd see a huge difference in, maybe not the amount of guilt the mothers feel, but I think you'd see a big difference in how they experience guilt and the things that they feel guilty about. You know, one thing I did do was it was nowhere near as in-depth as I would have liked, but I did include a chapter on marginalised mothers, which I thought was really important, because I did speak to as many mothers as I could who were kind of not in the quote unquote, you know, typical mother category. So I wanted to understand mothers' experiences who would classify themselves as being marginalised in some way. So that might be physical disabilities, or single parents, non-biological parents, step parents. I spoke to a couple of mums who had experienced domestic violence and had left their relationships. And so all of those people that I spoke to gave really rich insights into how differently they experience guilt through their own personal lens. And I thought that was very interesting. The mother who I spoke to, who had quite a lot of physical disabilities, for example, had completely redefined her relationship with guilt around things like screen time. You know, it wasn't even a blip on her radar that her daughter had to have, you know, 3 hours of screen time a day, because she couldn't physically look after her child, you know, and if she tried to, she would become so exhausted that she wouldn't be able to get out of bed at all, you know. So there's, you know, there were those really interesting nuances that came up from that very small cross section of, you know, mothers who were quote unquote atypical, let's say, from the norm, whatever the norm is. And so I would love to do more research in that. I thought that piece was really, really interesting. And there's a lot more to do, but our experience of guilt is very different. It depends on our personal circumstances and our family circumstances, for sure.
Thank you.
What great question, Sophia. Would anyone else like to ask a question? I don't want to sort of put you on the spot, so if you don't feel like asking a question, that's absolutely fine. So, Belinda, just to finish us off then, I wanted to know if you had one message for mothers, particularly mothers who are working or in leadership roles, who feel constantly torn, what would that message be?
That is a really good question. I think it would be get really clear on your values, and don't let guilt stop you from staying true to your values. So particularly when we're talking about work and leadership, and, you know, I've spoken to a lot of mums in senior roles who feel guilty, you know, for being away from their kids, for example, or, you know, not being able to be as present as they would like because they are still trying to keep in touch with their careers. And I think it's really, but how I would always encourage them to think would be of what amazing role models they're being for their kids, you know. And actually, I love throwing this study in. I found this study and I found an article about it the other day. I'm obsessed with it. is about how you only need to spend 15 minutes, not only 15 minutes a day with your children, but if you can spend 15 minutes a day, ideally, but, you know, like 3 times a week, you know, as an aspiration, of undivided attention with each child that you have, then there is a big school of thought of experts saying that is incredibly good for their well-being, and your well-being as well. So when we're worrying about there's also, as an aside, there's also a lot of evidence to suggest that modern mothers, even modern working mothers, are spending more time with our children than our previous generations. So, you know, go figure that one, because like a lot of previous generations weren't even working and they still didn't spend the same amount of time. So, you know, if you look at it through that lens, then we're feeling guilty because we're not being more present with our children. But actually, it's quality time that is most important over quantity. And you can have quality time if you miss a couple of bedtimes because you're late from work, or if you have to do a work trip, whatever. You can still build that quality time in to alleviate that guilt that you feel about the children. It's not about quantity. You don't have to be there all the time, you know. So I would say, remember that, you know, remember what a great role model you're being. Remember that it's quality over quantity. You know, try and reframe the guilt that you're feeling, and stay true to your values, because if your values are telling you that what your career is really, really important, or if you need to work and, you know, you have to keep earning, it's not a question, then but, you know, if that's important to you, that's important to you. That's part of who you are. That's your value. It's one of your core values. It doesn't mean that you're a bad mum if you want to, you know, climb the career ladder. It's so I think it's about reframing the mindset. And actually, I had a client recently who was experiencing a lot of guilt for not being more present with her children. And she just came up with this amazing idea of if she wasn't there when they got home from school, she would put a sandwich board inside the front door with a different message every day, you know, like so that they would get home, so that they would get home to her even if she wasn't physically there. So, you know, I think there are ways of alleviating that guilt, not just for us, but ways of connecting with our children and alleviating those feelings of guilt when it comes to work. But you just have to think about what's the reframe, you know. And actually, if you're stuck in that cycle of kicking yourself and the loop of the guilt and the shame and the blah, you've got to just take a pause and just say, whose voice is this, you know? And I would say that probably 80% of the time it's not even your voice that's telling you that you're a bad mother, you know, it's someone else's. And for God's sake, don't look at social media, or just put it down. If you're in a bad mood or you're feeling rubbish, just put it down, because it's not going to help you.
No, those 3 a.m. scrolls in early motherhood weren't very good.
And also, you know, remember that, God, the comparison is just rife. And remember that, you know, all these mothers that look like they have it perfectly together on Instagram have got 5 nannies, you know, 10 private chefs, all the rest of it. I know someone who told me they knew an influencer who looks on paper like she is the most doting mother in the whole world, but she knows for a fact that she spends 2 hours a day max with her children, and the second they stop filming for those posts that go on Instagram, her nanny whips the baby out of her hand and she's off. She's off, you know. And I'm not saying that's bad, good for her, but, you know, don't portray this image of perfect motherhood where you're doing it all yourself, because there's thousands of mothers that are watching you thinking that you are, you know. And actually, the reality of motherhood and work and life is that it's messy, and there is no perfect magic bullet, you know, and there is no real balance, and something will always slide when something else is, you know, up here and something else is down here. But I think you've just got to accept that, and accept it's not your fault, you know, and remember that massive systemic thing that we're mothering and working inside, you know, just keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Very quickly, did you create a new word in your book?
Oh God, did I? I don't know.
No, I loved it. I think it was comparisonitis.
Comparisonitis. Oh, I'm sure someone's used that before, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's a word or not. Yeah, comparisonitis. I think it's
brilliant.
It's brilliant because we all have it, and and the phones, I get rid of the phone. I'm terrible at it myself. I can sit here and tell you don't do it, but I think you've got to catch yourself, because we generally are doom scrolling when we're feeling bad about ourselves, you know. So
Yeah.
I think when we're feeling bad about ourselves, we need to resource ourselves in ways that are more helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that place of coming from your values, because again, sort of as a mother, what I feel that I have started to realize through all facets of life is that either you're going to be judged regardless of what you do. There's never really a right or a wrong answer. Or most of the time, people are just too busy with themselves to even care about what you're up to. So it makes sense just to follow the path that is right for you, and that does look different to everybody.
Okay, stay in your lane.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. I love
Remember,
that.
you're in your own lane in life.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Belinda, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I have found it just so enjoyable and valuable, and I absolutely recommend everybody, whether you are a parent or not, to go out and buy Belinda's book so that you can really just explore this a little bit further for yourselves. And as always, I want to leave you with a bit of a call to action. And that is, again, you know, no matter what your role is, whether you're a leader, parent, team member, or ally, just want you to take a few moments to pause and reflect on how guilt, expectations, and support is showing up in your environment. You know, perhaps just ask yourself, what are those silent pressures that are shaping how you lead, and how you show up in the workplace? And I'd like you to also ask yourself, what is one small shift that you can make today that can create a culture where flourishing, whether it's in work and in life, is not earned, but it's enabled? Okay. Because when we challenge guilt and choose connection, we don't just change the experience of mothers, we are changing the system for everyone. So thank you so much for everybody who has taken the time to listen. Belinda, it has been wonderful. And
thank you. You gave me goosebumps when you said that. I was like, oh,
great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you are so welcome, and I really hope we get to have more conversations going forward.
I love that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining the live session. And of course, if you have any questions listening into this at a later date, please do get in touch with myself. You can also get in touch with Belinda. All of our details will be on the follow-up email. And yeah, have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.